Money FM 89.3, the best of Saturday mornings. International News Review.
Good morning. Welcome back to the International News Review with Steve Okun. Our lead story, all three of the flight and data recorders have been recovered from that deadly midair collision near Washington, D.C., an American Airlines aircraft as well as a military helicopter. Steve, take us up to date. I mean, we're going to find out a whole lot more about what was going on. We do know some things already. Tell us what we know so far about the recovery efforts.
Well, first, let me just say nothing Trump does surprises me. But his behavior following the crash of Flight 5482 was loathsome. Dozens of people are dead. Their bodies are still in the water. The families are still rushing to the disaster site, and he's politicizing it with no justification at all. He's prejudging the cause of the crash, which we can talk about in a minute. And by his doing that, he's working to destroy the foundation of the entire U.S. aviation system to make a crash more likely in the future. And so it is just, having worked at the Department of Transportation, having spent hours and hours with the families of the victims of aviation disasters to put into place a system that would never allow this to happen, and he just wipes it out.
Just to add to that, one of his quotes on his Truth Social was his words, quote, "The Black Hawk helicopter was flying too high by a lot. It was far above the 200 feet limit. That's not really too complicated to understand, is it?" Now, that was referenced in a Guardian piece, and the Guardian piece was trying to be objective, and the writer said, his words, "It is unusual for a president to weigh in like this, especially on social media, and suggest the cause of the collision when officials have not yet revealed the cause of the deadly collision." Is this the president doing more harm than good?
Of course he is. It's not unusual. It's never, ever happened.
So what is the process? How's it supposed to go, Steve?
Here's how it's supposed to go. This is what the chair of the NTSB, the current chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, which owns the accident site, this is what she said when she arrived at the site. She says, as part of any investigation, we look at the human, the machine, and the environment. And then we investigate, we bring all the parties together, and we file a preliminary report usually a month later. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's the way it is working from the professionals right now. And Trump is blowing up that entire system. Because I was involved with, I was not an investigator. I'm a lawyer. I was on the policy side, right? But I was involved pretty close with 3 aviation disasters during my time. And all aviation disasters, they occur because of any number of different things that happen that don't prevent what should prevent something from happening. It rarely comes down to a single mistake. And so, yes, it certainly would seem from all of the published reports that the Black Hawk helicopter was flying too high in airspace it should not have been in, but why didn't that get prevented? There are systems in place that should have gotten to that Black Hawk, to the pilot, and said, "You're flying too high, don't fly there." Or there should have been somebody going to the pilot of American Eagle and saying, "You've got to abort, you've got to do something." So there's all of these fail-safe systems that are in place, and they all failed in this case as they all failed in other disasters. So we can kind of say this is the proximate cause, but any number of things may have been able to prevent this, and that's what the NTSB needs to do. What happened? Why didn't all of the systems work as they did? And so that we can learn and never allow this to happen again.
On that point, the Federal Aviation Administration's report obtained by all media organizations said staffing levels were, quote, "not normal for the time of day and volume of traffic." Why was that the case? Do we know that yet? Was it staff cutbacks, or is it too early to surmise?
No, I think it's the FAA has been understaffed for years and years, and you can almost go back to when Ronald Reagan fired all of the air traffic controllers.
The Patco strike.
When he became in, and it's almost 40 years later. It's very hard to replace that workforce. It takes time, and these are very hard jobs. They, relatively speaking, don't pay a lot of money.
Very stressful.
And they're hard. They're stressful. And so what happens is the staffing level isn't where it should be. And so there's recommendations about what should be the proper staffing level. And from what you read, they didn't have enough controllers in the tower at that time, given the time of day and given the amount of traffic. And so you can say it's staffing, but you can also say the airport is too crowded. Why is National Airport, which was built to accommodate 15 million passengers a year, now is accommodating 25 million? Why is National Airport, which is literally the most difficult commercial airport to land at in the entire United States, why is National got the busiest airport in the country? Why is it that members of Congress, because National is the only airport in the country that is controlled by the Congress, why is the Congress keep putting more flights and more flights and more flights into National just so they can get a direct flight to fly home? That's happened over years. So you can blame lots of people for why the situation occurred in that moment at that time. You could say there weren't enough controllers in there. You could have said maybe somebody got let out early for some reason. Were they sick? Did they have something else to do? And that this one controller then had to handle both planes and helicopters, which presumably happens a lot. So much happened that could have been prevented. So you can't pin this on any one person.
For those not familiar, so in the Washington, D.C. area, there are more than two, but the two main ones are DCA, which is this airport, which is right in the middle of town. It's an old airport. And then you have Dulles Airport, which is the big international airport on the outskirts of town. And nobody wants to go to Dulles if they don't have to take a flight, right?
And what happened was they put National is one of the few airports in the country that has what we call a perimeter rule. So when National was built when Dulles was built to encourage people to trek all the way out to Dulles, they said you could only have direct flights from a certain distance. And that's when senators say, I want to fly from Phoenix not to Dulles, but to National, or I want to fly from
because it's closer to where they're staying in the capital and all that.
And it's better for business. People will pay more money because you get a short metro or taxi ride into D.C. as opposed to having to trek in all the way out from the suburbs of Virginia. And so so National it was built, in pre-war. It's got the shortest commercial runway. It's a difficult place to land. You got helicopters going in and out of very tight controlled airspace. I hate to say it was a disaster waiting to happen because the disaster didn't have to happen, but there were so many situations that put so much stress onto that airport.
Briefly, that's the commercial side. The military side, Daniel Driscoll, Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of the Army, has questioned why there needs to be so many military helicopters conducting training exercises in such a busy commercial airport. Why?
Well, you have to have some training there because from what you read in the paper that this helicopter was running a training exercise, whereas it could have been the president or the Congress had to get evacuated, and so you have to practice these things because Washington is one of the most high intensity terrorist targets in the world. You better be prepared for that. So certainly, and this was on one of those contingency flights from what you read. So yes, it makes sense. Now, were there too many? Should they be doing it at different times of day? That's a question that will certainly be something the NTSB should be looking at. Now, the FAA has closed down that airspace to helicopters right now because you want to wait those 30 days until you get that recommendation, unlike what Donald Trump did, which is prejudging this, making it political, and causing grief for families, undercutting the system that we have why our aviation system is so safe. It's just a tragedy all around from every imaginable situation.
Yeah, and of course our condolences go out to anybody who has had lost a loved one or is involved in that terrible, terrible accident. All right, let's move on to a story that's closer to home, which is the U.S. Commerce Department looking into whether DeepSeek, this new AI Chinese company that's everyone's talking about, whether or not they have been using U.S. chips that were not allowed to be shipped to China and potentially have gone through Singapore to get to China. This has got the halls of power here very, very concerned because of the implications of going against any kind of trade issues with the U.S. Where do we stand on this, Steve? What do we know so far?
Look, we know that the U.S. has sanctions or restrictions on the types of chips that can go to China because the U.S. and China are in a trade war. They're in a technology war. There's elements of decoupling that are going on. And the United States wants to make certain that China cannot develop AI as well as the U.S. can because they fear China as the greatest adversary the United States has and has ever had, certainly in half a century or more. And so when all of a sudden DeepSeek comes out with AI capabilities that most people did not think the Chinese were ready to have yet, the question became, how did they do it? Did they do it through chips that they shouldn't have gotten that were sanctioned, or did they do it through chips that they didn't think were good enough that were allowed and that the U.S. had allowed, but they didn't think were good enough to get the Chinese to where DeepSeek apparently is? And so then the question becomes, okay, we have to look, the United States, how could they have gotten these chips? And you look, of course, at NVIDIA, and NVIDIA has a huge presence in Singapore, and you look at NVIDIA's revenue numbers, and 20% of all of NVIDIA's sales are booked through Singapore. Now, there's no way that Singapore is accounting for 20% of NVIDIA's chips, which means these chips are being sold to Singapore, but then they're going somewhere else. So the question is, where are they going and what chips are going? And that's something that the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party of the House of Representatives asked in writing. We need to know what role Singapore is playing in terms of the chips, what chips are going. And now, as the United States, you have to ask yourself, if they're getting chips that they're allowed to get the Chinese, do we have to put a greater ban on chips? And if they're getting chips they shouldn't be getting, where's it coming from and what do we need to do to stop it?
The other argument would be DeepSeek is just doing what Huawei did in 2019. I mean, are Chinese firms wrong to look for workarounds to deal with U.S. export controls and sanctions?
No, and one argument would be that the U.S. is actually making things worse.
Exactly. Because
they're forcing China to develop these. Now, the question is it a workaround, which is allowed, right? Are you giving the Chinese a huge incentive to develop their own AI without the chips, forcing them to be creative and clever and find things? Or is it a circumvention of sanctions? And those are two very different things. And so I don't think anybody knows, how is it that DeepSeek developed the AI that it developed? Did it do it because it worked around legally from a U.S. perspective, or were sanctions and restrictions violated, in which case that's a very different thing, and that's something that clearly the U.S. Commerce Department is looking at and the U.S. Congress is looking at.
From what I read so far, they did get NVIDIA chips, just not the high-end chip that is, they got a lower end NVIDIA chip, right? And the sanctions are apparently on the higher end.
Well, that's the question. Did they only get the lower end chip,
right?
Or did they were these higher end chips smuggled? And I'm using that word because it was reported by Reuters. Were these higher end chips they should not have gotten? Were these smuggled through countries? And those listed include Malaysia, Malaysia, Singapore, and the UAE. And so that is the question that is being looked at right now.
Got it.
Could you also say that this is American tech bros whining because out of necessity, this has just accelerated, as you said, Chinese innovation, and they've caught up with, or nearly caught up with, the AI models in the US and elsewhere at a fraction of the cost, and this is just American tech bros complaining.
Well, they don't know. I mean, some
who
of
get
them
lots of tax write-offs, get lots of support, get lots of tax cuts and everything else. So they get support as well at state level and elsewhere, just like they do in China.
The issue on the chips isn't the state support versus non-state support. The Trump administration, and I think the Biden administration in this case as well, views China as an adversary, that they can use this AI against the United States and against the United States interests for nefarious purposes. And that is why we need to keep this technology away from China. That's the premise of it. This isn't a commercial dispute. We'll talk about that with tariffs, right? This is about national security. And clearly this is an illustration of where national security and economics and trade collide.
Yeah. And let's take on tariffs now. Just a few hours ago, Trump said that he would impose hefty new tariffs of 25% on goods from Mexico and Canada and 10% on imports from China, and that nothing could be done by these three countries to stop it from happening. Now, he did reference a potential carve-out for oil from Canada, of course, blah, 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 blah. But basically, this is going to happen. And what is going to be the net result? Is there a chance this could backfire on the Trump administration by making goods more expensive in the U.S. and raising those levels of costs for American consumers?
Well, of course, tariffs are coming. We just don't know when and how much and who. But they're coming. Are they coming tomorrow? Are they coming 28 days from now? Or are they going to come 6 months from now? But Donald Trump believes that the only way you are going to get manufacturing back to the United States is if you tariff countries in which the United States has a persistent trade imbalance. And that persistent trade imbalance, in particular, Canada, Mexico, and China are in that top three. And you can put Japan, Korea, and the EU up there as well. So they're nowhere near out of the gate in terms of getting tariffs yet. But why Trump is picking these three countries first is because he is going to use, for the first time ever, this legislation called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA in trade terms. And if he can declare an emergency, then he has all of this authority to declare tariffs. And the emergency he's declared here is fentanyl, and that the fentanyl crisis is killing millions of Americans, and the press secretary is completely hyperinflating how many Americans are dying from fentanyl, not saying that it's not an emergency, but the question is it emergency purposes of this statute? We don't know. And he's saying we've got an emergency, and that gives me the right to do whatever I want when it comes to tariffs. Doesn't matter that the U.S., Mexico, and Canada have a free trade agreement. I'm going to hit them with 25% tariffs, and because the precursors come from China on fentanyl, I'm going to hit them with 10%, and then the chemicals go to Canada and Mexico, and then they come across the border into the U.S., so I'm going to hit them with 25%. And it's worth paying that price for a couple of reasons. One, it will stop death. We'll see. And two, it will bring manufacturing back home, which he can't say because that's not the statutory authority he has here, but that's what he believes.
But is it potentially going to affect his own base? Because as Glenn mentioned just then, it's going to potentially rise prices in the US. It's going to increase inflation and the cost of living in the US. So the basket of groceries are going to get more expensive. But then the other way around, US exporters are going to face a tough time if they face rising tariff barriers on that side, as they try and sell into foreign markets. So this could potentially hit Trump's base twice.
All right, two different issues. The first one, that Trump will argue, or maybe not Trump because he is not a sophisticated economist, but the economists in the America First world in the Trump administration, they'll say, yes, tariffs may raise prices and that may be inflationary, but we are going to do deflationary things as well. Drill, baby, drill, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to lower the price of energy. We are going to cut regulation, which you're going to see through Elon Musk, which we'll talk about in a moment. We're going to lower the deficit. And all of those things are deflationary. So, yes, we will have inflationary aspects from tariffs, but it will be offset by the deflationary. So the American consumer will be even at the end of the day. Now, the second point, which is I agree completely, is, yeah, are other countries going to say, oh, thank you, Mr. Trump, for putting a 25% tariff on us or a 10% tariff? Of course they're going to retaliate. Canada has to retaliate. Mexico has to retaliate. China has to retaliate. And no one knows what that retaliation is going to be and how that's going to impact manufacturing. And you can be certain that the Canadians and the Mexicans are going to be extremely smart. They're going to be extremely targeted, and they're going to go after Republican districts, Republican states where they have Republican senators, Republican House members, and they're going to hammer them as much as they can to try and get the Republicans to split on this. So we've got a long way to go to see how this plays out.
In what way? How will they hammer them?
They'll hammer them with tariffs. And so whatever congressional districts export the most to Canada, you find that product and you put tariffs on that product. So where is and John Thune, who's the Senate minority leader the Senate majority leader, right, from the Dakotas, you hammer the Dakotas. You hammer Louisiana because that's where the House Speaker is from. You hammer those districts. So they have very smart lobbyists who are and smart political people who understand the U.S. system, understand where our pain points are, and they're going to go after them in as powerful and targeted a way because they want to protect their economy but knock these tariffs off.
Yeah. All right. Last thing we're going to be able to talk about is what's being called this fork in the road memo that went out from Donald Trump. On Tuesday, Trump offered federal employees an opportunity to resign from their posts in exchange for an 8-month severance pay package and retaining all of their benefits until September. But the employees have to make a decision whether or not they're going to accept this by next week. And this is causing a lot of consternation. There are some 2 million civilian full-time federal workers that could be eligible for this, and it includes the Foreign Service and others, people that work at the embassies and all that. So it could even have an impact directly on a place like Singapore.
It just shows how really mean and nasty the Trump administration and Elon Musk, who is part of the Trump administration, how mean and nasty they are to federal employees, how they don't understand what they do, and the way they're treating them. And so when they've come out with this email that is got the instructions have the word resign, and it says a fork in the road, of course, that comes directly from Elon Musk because that's the same type of thing that he used when he took over Twitter to eliminate jobs there. And they put out an FAQ with this memo. And so some of the questions on there, one of the questions, am I allowed to get a second job during this deferred resignation period? And the answer is absolutely. We encourage you to find a job in the private sector as soon as you would like to do so. The way to greater American prosperity is encouraging people to move from lower productivity jobs in the public sector to higher productivity jobs in the private sector. It is just astounding. And then the other FAQ, can I take an extended vacation while on administrative leave? You are most welcome to stay at home and relax or to travel to your dream destination, whatever you would like.
Wow. I'll give you a philosophical question to finish. With Trump, we can't keep up. Whatever we say, we're already dated. As I'm looking at the live site now at The Guardian, you've got Democrats calling the firing of FBI officials deeply alarming as some federal websites appear to go dark right now as we're sitting here. Also, just to add to that, Trump has ordered the USDA to take down websites referencing, wait for it, climate crisis. So he wants everything related to climate crisis taken off of government sites. Steve, where does this end? Where are we going?
It hasn't even been 2 weeks.
I know. And I literally can't keep up with the news that's breaking now.
I mean, that's part of the Steve Bannon strategy, right? And I'll have to take out the expletive, is flood the zone. Right? He said flood the zone with blank, right? He says flood the zone. Just flood it so much that they can't keep up with it. Put in so many nominees to your cabinet who are unqualified that if you put in 5 or 6, well, if they stop 1 or 2, then 4 completely incompetent, unqualified people will get through. Or if you only put in 1, well, they might block that. And so this is the flood the zone strategy, and there's no reason to believe that, next week or the week after that strategy will come to an end.
It is crazy times. We will be covering more of this. We're trying hard to find Asia news, and it's hard to find news in Asia because all of the stuff out of the U.S.
has an impact on Asia.
Everything, right?
Hey, look, NVIDIA, 20% of the revenue from NVIDIA is Singapore. Singapore is going to have huge economic hits from tariffs. They're going to have huge economic hits from this, from the increasing U.S.-China tensions. And everybody says, oh, well, we don't want to have to choose sides. Well, you know what? The other two are going to make you choose. And so it unfortunately, the impact in Singapore in particular as a trading nation is going to be felt very, very deeply. And we may be talking about Donald Trump a little bit more than we want to, but can we make a promise we won't do all 4 stories next week on Trump?
Well, let's do that. Yeah, right. Let's agree to that. All right, Steve, thanks so much. Glad you're back. Glad you're feeling better. And we'll see you next week.
Happy New Year.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.